put on your camera, because I can't for some reason. But I'm just gonna make you the speaker. Hi everyone. You're not gonna see me, but I'm Luke from CD. I'm gonna introduce Mohammad for a bit. He is one of the leading experts on Jewish-Arab relations within Israel. He's presented lectures and papers at the European Parliament, NATO, the Club de Madrid, the US Congress, and you've won also some awards. And you're here to talk with us about Jewish-Arab relations in Israel. And the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Luke. It's a great pleasure to be with CD again. And I see among the participants some of the friends of Givat, Haviva in Holland. It's a great pleasure to see you and be with you. When we talk about Jewish-Arab relations in Israel, we need to actually put it on some time frame. The issue of Arab citizens in Israel started actually in 1948, when the State of Israel legitimized the citizenship of 156,000 Palestinians who stayed in what became the State of Israel in 1948. And Israel basically didn't know what to do with this population, although in the Declaration of Independence, it extended an invitation to Arab citizens to stay and be part of the building and the prosperity of the State of Israel. And it promised, the Declaration of Independence promised social, economic, and political equality. But that was in May 1948. In October 1948, the State of Israel actually changed its mind, and it decided to impose military administration on all Arab towns and villages in Israel, and basically holding Arab citizens in some kind of a quarantine situation, some kind of containment situation, where Arab citizens were inside their villages without the right to move out of their towns and villages until almost 1963. It was military administration imposed on Arab citizens, not civilian administration. And the state was thinking that this is a group that will probably disappear in some kind of an arrangement between Israel and Arab countries, where Israel will exchange population, take the Jews inside from Arab countries inside Israel, and maybe get rid of the Arab citizens and reduce their demographic size in what is called the Jewish state at that time. Now, this problem did not disappear. Arab citizens and the opportunity for population exchange did not happen. And in 1963, the Knesset, the Israeli parliament, decided to legitimize and finalize and finish the military administration and start civic relationship between the state and its Arab citizens. That was the beginning of a process of naturalization and of civic relationship, which actually started by adopting a policy of integration. The policy of integration meant a great deal of development work that started happening in our towns and villages, development of infrastructure, development of educational schools and so on, and the beginning of dealing with Arab citizens also from the perspective of individual freedoms. Meanwhile, also, the State of Israel defined itself already from day one as a Jewish state, the state of the Jewish people, not as an Israeli state, meaning it's not the state of the Israeli people. Basically, Israel is defining itself as an ethnic homeland for the Jewish people and not a civic homeland for the citizens of the state. And there is a gap that, sorry, 1 second.
It's okay, it can happen.
So there's a gap between the Jewish nature of the state and the Israeli nature of the state. And that's a gap that started day one and it continues till today. And that's the source of tension, mostly between Jewish and Arab and Jewish-Arab relations in Israel. Let's divide the discussion into two directions. One, which I call the vertical debate about the identity of the shared space, the identity such as the national identity of the State of Israel, where it says it's a Jewish state, meaning that leaving Arab citizens outside. Then you talk about the flag, which is a Jewish symbol only. It has no civic nature into it. You have the national anthem, which speaks about national soul. You have the official national holidays and symbols and so on. In that discourse about whose state is it? Is it the state of the Israelis or is it the state of the Jews? There is a big difference between the perception of Arab citizens versus the perception of Jewish citizens. Jewish citizens want to possess everything for themselves and maintain that thing for themselves. And Arab citizens are basically pushing the limits of that definition to say the state has to mature, has to grow, to become an inclusive state and not an exclusive state. Now it defines itself as an exclusive club that is owned by the Jewish people, not necessarily only the Jewish Israelis, but also the Jewish people outside the state of Israel. That's a debate that we see explodes every now and then. The last explosion we saw was on the 19th of July, 2018, when the state of Israel passed a law which is called the nation state law, which it's a basic law which has a constitutional value, which affirms that Jewish identity of the state and even allows the state to discriminate against Arab citizens in a number of areas, such as downgrading the status of Arab language, which until that moment was an official language, but as of 2018, it's no more an official language of the state. But also the state in that law says that it has the right to promote and develop Jewish settlements inside Israel to serve the Jewish people, meaning that it does not have the duty to serve Arab citizens. Overall, in the last 73 years or 74 years soon of the life of the state of Israel, there has been a main gap on how does the state see national resources distributed. Are they distributed based on the need of the citizens or based on the needs of the Jewish people? Most of the time, those resources are spent based on the needs of the Jewish people, which created a situation of discrimination. The Or Commission report, which was a government commission founded in the year 2001 and presented the report in the year 2003, said for the first time that Israel has been institutionally and deliberately discriminating against its Arab citizens. But they also say this has to end because this is in Israel's national interest. To end discrimination is in Israel's national interest. That was the first time that Israel went out of denial stage of denying the fact that discrimination exists, but also it showed the direction that the policy has to be ending discrimination and focusing on integration. Now, when you talk about the vertical aspect on identity, actually, we're not going in that direction at all. The direction is the opposite direction. Israel is Judaizing itself more and more than it is Israelizing itself more and more, at least on the political and identity aspect. But if you look on the horizontal approach on areas that Jews and Arabs interact with, you begin to see a process of Israelization. One, the Israelization of the Arab citizens that are beginning to fit in the system, and I will share with you a few examples, but also an Israelization of the Jewish population that is beginning to realize that it has to share resources, it has to share institutions, it has to adapt itself to the reality of a multicultural society. I'll give you a few examples. So if you go to the medical system in Israel, almost 1/3 of the medical staff in Israel are Arab citizens. 23% of the doctors in hospitals, 35% of the nurses, 35% of the dentists, and more than 55% of the pharmacists. And there, two things happened. One, the Arab community built its capacity to be part of the medical industry with the higher jobs. And the Jewish population and the state establishment created the space, allowed this integration to happen based on mutual needs. The Arab citizens needed the jobs, the Jewish citizens needed the services, the medical services, and there's a win-win relationship. So you see this as an island in Israeli life where Jewish-Arab relations are even disproportionate to favor Arab citizens. In other areas, the disproportionate system actually is against Arab citizens. Let's take another island, the civil service. When the Orr Commission report was published, the percentage of Arab citizens in civil service, meaning people that work for the government, was only 1.7%, while Arab citizens are 21% of the population. Today, we are talking about 13%, jumping from 1.7% to 13%. This is a huge jump in the percentage of Arab citizens in civil service. You see it also in the police service. In 2003, it was only 1%. Today, it's almost 12.5% of the police force that is Arab. You go to the universities. In 2003, the percentage of Arab students in Israeli universities was only 3.5%. Today, it's 19%. Again, the Arab community is coming and developing an appetite to move into that direction. The Jewish population or the establishment is creating space. And that's where the win-win interdependency starts to develop. Now, if we go to the social aspect, Luke, we see two main problems. The first problem is physical separation, which is mostly based on the residential system that existed in Israel pre-state and continues to happen today. 92% of Arab citizens live in separate Arab towns and villages. Only 8% live in mixed cities, but 92% live completely separately. They do not interact on daily basis with Jewish citizens, and Jewish citizens do not interact with them on the daily residential life. So you can live almost all your life without having to meet a Jewish person. The same thing with the Jewish person. 92% of the Jews live in separate towns and villages. And for those 92%, they do not need any interaction with an Arab fellow citizen. And that separation allows the growth of alienation, the growth of stereotypes, the growth of racism on both sides. And this is a reason for many of the problems that we have, mostly problems of ignorance about each other. The second institutional problem that we have is the separation in the educational system. I mean, in the residential structures, we have 8% integration, but when you talk about education, the segregation is even much, much worse. There are only 7 mixed schools in Israel out of 4,800 schools. 4,000 segregated schools and only 7 mixed schools. And the volume of growth in the amount of mixed schools is maybe 1 school every 3 to 4 years. So if we continue with the same speed of integrating the educational system, it probably will take us about 15 to 20,000 years. That's not sufficient time frame for social change. The segregation on the educational system, which seems to be something that both Arab and Jewish citizens want. They're comfortable with the fact that education is accessible in the neighborhood and that you study in separate languages. But the result is that you have 2 separate, different civic creatures that are not only educated with different languages, but also with different pedagogic content. The Hebrew educational system does not have the same Arabic educational system. It's not the same language, not the same quality of mathematics, not the same quality of physics or English or Hebrew or Arabic. Now, Arab citizens have to study Hebrew, which I definitely agree with, and I think it's important because it is the language of the majority, and the minority has to master the language of the majority. That you need that. The minority needs it as the tool for social, economic, political mobility. Without that, you will always remain marginal. But 100% of the Arab students study Hebrew. Maybe the quality is not good enough, but at least they get by with Hebrew. the weakness of the Hebrew reduces the mobility and the speed of integration. While on the Jewish side, only 17% of the Jewish citizens study Arabic. Only 17%. Now, I claim that to live in a multicultural society like Israel, where 21% of the population are Arab, and if you add to this also the Palestinians in the West Bank, who also have a lot of relations with Israelis, I think that to be an Israeli citizen, every citizen has to be bilingual. Every citizen has to be bilingual. So that social separation, educational separation, allows, again, contributes to increasing the stereotypes, the alienation, the fear, and often some other movements or trends such as racism that develops over time. Now, how do we resolve that? There are a few ways to resolve it. But before I go there, let's try to assess a new process that happened. I've been one of the leaders in this process to re-examine how, based on what do we approach Jewish-Arab relations. In the past, until about maybe 15 years ago, or actually let's mark the Orr Commission report. That was in 2003, that was already 19 years ago. Jewish-Arab relations were seen through the lens of what's called the social contact theory. Trying to promote a term which was used, the term was called coexistence. Let's get to know each other. I mean, the social contact theory basically means socialization, cultural exchange. We sometimes ridicule this and call it hummus coexistence. Let's come all together, eat some hummus, enjoy each other's company, and everything will be fine. Why? Because we humanize each other. Now, it's critical to humanize the other in a conflict situation. It's critical. But what we understand now is that that's not enough. Because if you want to only create coexistence and maintain disparity in status, social, economic, political status, it's going to explode. We've seen the explosion happening in October 2000, and we saw it also in May 2021, just a few months ago. And the key reason is that we're only focusing on the niceties in Jewish-Arab relations, that we're all humans, we're all wonderful, we can fly kites and eat hummus together, or we can sing peace songs together. But everyone afterwards goes to their home where there is disparity. I wrote an article about this 20 years ago. I called it the horse and rider syndrome of coexistence, that the horse and rider can enjoy a wonderful relationship. They can see the same and enjoy the same view. They can drink from the same river. They sweat together. And the best case scenario is when the control of the rider to the horse is seamless, is not seen. You even start forgetting who's controlling whom. Now, this kind of a horse and rider wonderful relationship usually ends at the end of the ride. One goes to the barn and eats hay, and one goes to the castle and eats a steak. So we can bring Jewish and Arab kids to our campus at Givat Haviva. They can wonderfully enjoy each other's company for 2-3 days and start seeing the other person as a human being. But then we have what we call the returning home syndrome, where the disparity, one goes to their underprivileged Arab towns and villages that have been neglected by the government for the past 73 years and live with almost 50% poverty. And the Jewish citizens go to their privileged situation where they have social economic conditions which are much better, but they also live in the state where they are privileged citizens that know that the state cares for them more than it cares for the non-Jewish citizens of the state. So we can create temporary situation of equality where you allow that discourse of humanization, but it is temporary because the reality outside is not the engineered reality that we can create in an encounter at Givat Haviva. So with time, we started getting some kind of challenges of people saying, we don't want these kind of nice encounters. We want to talk about the problems. Let's talk about the disparity. Let's talk about the identity of the state, the identity of the public space. And let's also talk about narratives. Basically, let's allow the elephant into the room. We're not just here to talk about hummus, but to talk about right and wrong, just and unjust, the legal system, the 28 laws in Israel, such as the nation state law that officially discriminate against Arab citizens, and how do we challenge and change those kind of things. These are usually very educational encounters. You get with a much more knowledge about the other than just realizing they're a human being. You understand their identity, you understand their history. But with time, we started realizing that the maximum you can get out of those encounters is agree to disagree. Most people still do not agree on most of the historic narrative. Most Arab citizens still see what happened in May 1948 as a disaster for the Palestinian people, while most Jews see it as a reason to celebrate freedom and rebirth of the Jewish people. And you cannot convince the mainstream in both sides that the other narrative is the more right narrative. I mean, these are two, I'm not sure even that they're competing narratives, but these are two parallel narratives depending from how you look at this perception. Usually, if you get stuck in a narrative debate, you start backtracking. So you go back to were there Jewish people before or were there Palestinian people before? And we end up usually debating who did Abraham want to sacrifice? Was it Isaac or was it Ishmael? And we still disagree on that. Although this happened maybe 4,000 years ago. We still disagree on those matters, and actually we will continue to disagree. Because if I convince Jewish fellow citizens that it was Ishmael that was under the knife of Abraham, this probably will be the end of their Jewish narrative. If they convince me that it was Isaac and not Ishmael, this will be the end of my Islamic narrative. That we need to understand that there were things that you have to agree to disagree on. There are things that you have to accept a different perspective because it forms a different identity, which is a legitimate identity. You know, the facts actually do not count. Because if I bring 1,000 books and resources to prove that it was Ishmael, it's not going to be convincing. If someone brings 1,000 textbooks and resources to prove that it was Isaac, I wouldn't care also. For me, it will always be Ishmael. For a Jewish person, it will always be Isaac. And the same story regarding, was it Nakba or was it Atzmaut? Was it the disaster for the Palestinians or was it the liberation and independence of the Jews of 1948? But as I said, this is an important exercise. The debate, the narrative debate is an important exercise because it allows us to go into the hearts and souls of the others. It allows the development of tolerance and acceptance, even if it's not agreeing to that narrative, but at least you understand it and you give it the space. But we also know that agreeing to disagree is not good enough. So now we have two theories in Jewish-Arab relations that have shortfalls. One is the social contact theory that says, okay, being nice is good as long as we're together, but it doesn't solve the hierarchic structure. Then being honest and talking about the differences is important and educational. But again, you end up agreeing to disagree. We're not yet at a place where we can create a shared narrative that creates a third identity to which we can subscribe. The notion of creating a third identity, such as the Israeli civic identity, is still at the very, very early stages. It takes usually a few generations to develop a third identity. We're not there yet. So what do we do? So the Or Commission report, which I invite all the attendees to actually go and read, there's a summation of the Or Commission report, suggests an interesting path. And as I said, this was a government commission headed by Supreme Court Justice Theodore Orr. They suggested for the first time a third path. They said, let's focus on mutual interests. Let's identify mutual interests. If we go to the theory of conflict resolution, there's a theory that supports that notion. It's called the superordinate goal theory. It's in conflict resolution methodologies. And the superordinate goal theory says you can like or dislike the other, you can agree or disagree on that with the other, but you have mutual interests. And the mutual interests necessitate cooperation, necessitate partnership and sometimes necessitate interdependency, such as in the medical industry. So if you are a Jewish patient going to a hospital and your doctor is an Arab doctor and you refuse service from an Arab doctor, you could likely die. So you need that service. So this theory is beginning to develop many more islands in Jewish-Arab relations. The government is subscribing to that notion right now. They just passed in the current budget, the new budget, they passed a 30 billion shekels bill that was almost a $10 billion investment that is going to go into the Arab community to help bring Arab economy much closer or to become much more equal to the Jewish economy. It's not enough, but it is a huge step in the right direction. Now, if you're from the Jewish side, say, why should we invest in them? Because they're still not part of the mainstream in Israeli society. If you're part of the Arab community, you say, it's not enough. It's not getting us where we want. When we talk about creating shared society, we talk about two main components. One component is good relations. If you want to build a shared society, you need to build good relations, whether it is social contact, dialogue on narratives, or mutual interests. But next to this, you also need equality so that you feel this is a just system. 88%, Luke, of Arab citizens say they support the notion of shared society. 88%. With those two components, good relations and equality. In the Jewish side, it's 68%, which is fantastic because usually the need of the majority, the support of the majority is always less. You know, the majority is busy being a majority. The minority wants the integration. It's natural that the minority has higher interest. But 2/3 of the Jewish population supports the notion of shared society. Where's the difference? The difference is in these two components, good relations and equality. In what comes first? Most Jews say good relations first. And if we succeed in having good relations, this will lead towards equality. Most Arab citizens see the exact opposite dynamics. They say equality first, and if we reach equality, then we will play our more active role in good relations. It's like opposite directions. Each side is waiting for the other to make the steps towards them. Now, at Givat Haviva, we see this as two parallel tracks. These two components are two parallel components in shared society. You need to move in each direction, in both directions at the same time. You cannot halt, you cannot wait. You cannot put pause on one of them and hope that the other side is going to wait for you. You need to move in both directions at the same time. And this actually is the foundation of our programming. I invite you for two more, I will refer you to two more documents. In December 2017, I led a team of 70 people, half Jewish, half Arab, and we drafted policy recommendations for shared society. And we called it Roadmap for Shared Society. Roadmap, you can download it in English also from our website, but it suggests 143 policy recommendations in 5 areas: education, economics, land, governance, and culture, where we are saying to the government, adopt those 143 recommendations, make them part of the legal system, and this is a guarantee to solve 95% of Jewish Arab problems in Israel. Yes, it is short of dealing with a vertical debate about identity. And we chose not to deal with that because that's the job of the politicians at the end of the day. It's not the job of civil society. As civil society, we said, here are islands, 143 islands that you can build, and this will allow the creation of proper integration, equal integration of Arab citizens, equal distribution of state resources. Again, we're not touching the flag, we're not touching, there's certain things that probably need to wait few more generations. To ask the Jewish citizens to make amendment to the flag so that it becomes more inclusive or more neutral or of more civic nature, to ask them this today, they will consider it as war against their identity. We probably need 5, 10, I don't know, maybe 20 generations until the Jewish population feels comfortable enough in the Jewish-Arab partnership that they will say, okay, we will add the flower or we will add the bird on the flag. It's, we're not talking about changing the flag, we're talking about amending it, maybe about addition to it, something that could be of representation for the non-Jewish citizens in this symbol. But again, these are things that maybe currently we can only identify them as an issue, put them in the shelf, and deal with working solutions where we know there are mutual interests. Now, where can we find those kind of areas? So we know, for example, that the high-tech industry in Israel is actually 40% of the GDP. 40% of Israel's economy is high-tech. The percentage of Arab employees in high-tech is about 5%. That's not enough. So we're missing, Arab citizens are missing the big party of the economy. Maybe we have overrepresentation in the medical industry, but to be a nurse is not a wonderful salary. But to be a high-techist is a wonderful salary. And so if you want to bring in more income into the Arab community, more wealth to Arab families, you need to help train Arab citizens to integrate into the high-tech industry. So it means that we're working with the universities to increase the percentage of Arab students into the high-tech industry. And we work with the high-tech companies to have them develop more diversity approach in their workforce. Another area that we're looking at is partnership between neighboring Jewish and Arab municipalities, where they might need a joint soccer team, a joint soccer field, that neither one of them can afford it. So if we can identify mutual need of a soccer field or a public park or an industrial zone that both communities can benefit from it, this starts the process of creating regional cooperation or regionalization of Jewish-Arab relations instead of politicization of Jewish-Arab relations. If we continue on the focusing on the ethnic identity aspect in Jewish-Arab relations, we'll continue agreeing to disagree. If we look on the horizontal aspect, identify the mutual interests and needs, we can create partnerships that actually create experiences that could potentially become a critical mass in few generations to develop regional identity and maybe civic identity in the state of Israel. Now, if you ask me, are we on the right path? I definitely think we are on the right path, despite the explosion of May 2021. And if we compare the explosion of 2021 with the explosion of October 2000, 21 years difference, we see an incredible difference. I mean, they both had the same velocity and the same negative impact and disbelief that this issue can work together, a huge anger on both sides. But the rebounds is very different. It took almost 10 years to rebound from the October 2000 events. There is even a book by Professor Sami Samouha. He calls it the lost decade in Jewish-Arab relations. He wrote it in October 2010 and basically said we lost 10 years in trying to fix Jewish-Arab relations because of the October 2000 events. He said the responsibility was lack of proper government policy, that the business population did not attend to it, civil society organizations were weak, and so on and so on. But if you look at the rebounds from May clashes that we had, I think that within 10 months or 9 months already, we did surpass the 10 years that happened after October 2000. The people went back to normal life very, very quickly, thanks to a few things. One, a different political atmosphere where we have a government that has Arab members of the Knesset as part of the government, which legitimizes Arab political decision-making role. So it contributes to the status of the Arab citizens. Second, different intervention of the police during those events. We did not have 13 Arab citizens killed. We had only one person killed because of policy of refraining from using live ammunition in the demonstrations. So we had less casualties and less reasons to carry big amounts of anger and frustration. The third, the role of civil society organizations like Givat Haviva. We knew what our role was this time. We didn't dock down and wait for the wave to pass. We actually stood tall and said, we have now a role now to play, whether it's in education or engaging municipal leaders or telling the government what needs to be done or getting out to the press and making the state the counter arguments to say, no, we can live together and we can work together. We accumulated enough successes to protect in Jewish Arab relations. And even we saw the business community coming out with ads and campaigns promoting Jewish Arab positive relations, which is the first time ever role that was played. So I think we're a healthier society 20 years later than after October 2000. We're a much healthier society. We still have crises that erupt. You know, we're not at an optimal, far still from an optimal situation, but there is enough local municipal leadership and civil society leadership that knows what needs to be done. And the atmosphere, the political atmosphere today is definitely a better political atmosphere where we have more partners in the government than after October 2000. I'll stop here maybe I spoke for too long, but we have some time if you want to take some questions or comments. You're on mute.
I should unmute myself, sorry. Yeah, first of all, I want to thank you. It's been an enlightening lecture. It's really deep, really, new stuff to take in. And even our audiences, you've won them over because they don't really have questions yet. So come on, audience, bring it on.
I was either very confusing or very convincing.
You were very good, very clear even. So if I've heard you correctly, you say that the role of the new government did really help in cementing, well, at least somewhat better ties between Jews and Arabs, right?
Yeah, I mean, I would say two components. First of all, the symbolic aspect, that the fact that there is an Arab party in the coalition. This is the first time in history, you know, where the Jewish state takes, and the Jewish government, the Jewish state takes Arab citizens and Arab members of the Knesset as legitimate partners in decision-making capacity. So it's not only Jews that decide, it's also Arab citizens that decide. And they sit on the faucet of budget. They sit and they're part of a 61 seat majority versus 59 in the opposition. The government is dependent on their existence. And as such, the government is in constant dialogue with those 4 Arab members of the Knesset to talk about the problems. And there's always a discussion of how far can they go in changing the state relationship with the government. So you see failures and you see successes, but the issue is on the table all the time. The government has to deal with this on daily basis, sometimes 20 times a day when you have 20 votes in the Knesset, which puts the issue of Arab citizens on the right platform and the right level of interest in Israeli society. Now, the second important part is the fact that this trickles down into the government agencies, the bureaucratic side. The fact that there's that amount of money that was dedicated in the budget, 30 billion shekels. That's, as I said, it's almost $10 billion. Maybe I should speak in euros. That means that there's money to be put to solve specific issues, specific problems. One of the problems, for example, is zoning plans in Arab towns and villages, so that you can start building homes without the fear that these homes will be demolished. If you don't have a zoning plan approved by the government, you cannot build a house, even if you own the land. You need the zoning plan. You need the Ministry of Interior to give you the exact location and to connect you with sewage, with electricity, with water, and so on. Otherwise, your construction is illegal. So this allows a great deal of legal housing process when we know that there's 50,000 Arab homes that are built illegally on private lands, but they're not considered legal because the government neglected the creation of zoning plans, and which pushed people to, out of pressure, they pushed people to go and build anyhow, and it got them into the problem of house demolition and problems of illegal housing, and not able to get electricity and not able to get water and things like that. So these changes actually create a significant opportunity. There's money to solve those kind of problems of housing, problems of infrastructure, sewage, basically start fixing quality of life. You know, look, Arab citizens are only 21% of the population, but they're 60% of the poor. 47% of Arab citizens below poverty line. And this cannot be fixed without programs that help integrate Arab citizens into the job market, integrate Arab women into the job market, speed the process of entering the job market. Arab citizens can only create 11% of the jobs, but they are 21% of the manpower. So you need to solve the problem of 10% of the Israel's population to work in the Jewish side, which means you need proper public transportation, not only between Arab towns and Arab towns, but between Arab towns and employment centers in Jewish towns. You need to improve the quality of Hebrew. You need to train the Jewish employers how to understand to work with an Arab employee that during the month of Ramadan does not need a lunch break because he's fasting. He needs to leave work 1 hour earlier. And so it's not just working with the Arab community, it's also to work with the Jewish community to increase its capacity to interact with the Arab community.
All right. Yeah, that's a really clear answer. So thanks. You said that 88% of the Arab Israelis would like to have better relations. Are they mostly young people, old people? Do they live in, I don't know, in cities, in towns? Yeah. Who are they? Who are the 88%?
I mean, 88% is massive.
Exactly. Yeah.
I would say there are two main groups that have hesitation or give you negative answers. And these are ideologically based groups. One is part of the Islamic movement that actually want to see an Islamic state. They don't want to see not the Jewish state, not the Palestinian state, and not the civic state. For them, any non-Muslim, non-religious Muslim state is evil. And by the way, there are also some Jewish groups like that in Israel. But we have some Islamic-based groups inside the Arab community that have that perspective. Another group is Palestinian nationalists within the Arab community that do not want to recognize the political entity called the State of Israel. For them, they see Israel as an illegitimate project that needs to end, and they support the concept of maybe one-state solution where Israel and Palestine will be one state, and as such, they do not think that integration in Israeli society is the right thing to do because it's subjecting yourself to the Jewish majority law and Jewish majority symbols and so on.
Yeah.
So most of the 12% are ideologically based rejection of integration, and it's less geographic or demographic.
Yeah, fair enough. Sounds good. There are a few questions. I'm going to try to combine them. Someone asked, do you believe that a Palestinian state would bring peace? And would Arab Israelis, do they support that? Maybe there's one I can tie into that. Do you see a possibility that Jewish settlers will be integrated into said future Palestinian state? Yeah, so maybe those two. Maybe you can combine them.
Yeah, I'll try. I still do think that a two-state solution is a critical need to accomplish two things. One is a homeland for the Jewish people with clear borders, and we don't have clear borders. and a homeland for the Palestinian people with clear borders. So we know where sovereignty of each side starts and ends. Today, this is still a debated topic. And as long as that debated topic is out there, I don't think peace can be accomplished. We need some order, and the order is a matter of borders. And borders is to allow the Palestinians to create their own unique homeland. But I say it's kind of negotiating a divorce where you split the house, but it's a complicated divorce because you have many children. So you have to deal with the issues of the borders, access to holy places, water, electricity, security, airspace, settlers that want to live not because of trying to make a political statement in a future Palestinian state. If you want to make a political statement, then clearly you do not deserve to live there. But if you like the mountain and you buy the land, or you want to live in Hebron because you want to be close to a religious place, I think this is legitimate and needs to be discussed. But if you come in order to challenge the Palestinian right for sovereignty in a future Palestinian state, then actually you're declaring war at the Palestinians. And you should. It's better not to allow people that are coming as provocators to materialize their capacity to do that. But as I said, even if we do have a two-state solution, I think 24 hours later, we need to discuss some kind of a confederal relationship between Israel and the future Palestinian state. So that is a temporary need that allows both sides to understand where their sovereignty starts and ends.
Yeah.
But the next day, we need to talk about a joint tax system, a joint environmental policy, a joint airspace policy, a joint, we have now more than 150,000 Palestinian workers that move to Israel every single day to work. Just closing the borders, announce the state and close the borders, this is, death sentence for 150,000 Palestinian families.
Exactly.
So the interdependency between the two sides is the topic 24 hours after the announcement of the two-state solution. They have to be two states that work together, prosper together, create huge interdependency so that thinking about a future war between the two sides will be destructive for the one that thinks about it. You should have that interdependency so you sustain peace afterwards. Sounds
super clear. There's a few more questions. I find really interesting. Does the army play a role in improving the relations between Jews and Arabs? Maybe would an Arab-Israeli be willing to fight for Israel? And maybe we can slightly connect it to it. Would a better shared society improve the position of Israel in the wider Arab world?
First of all, I think that regarding the army, and this has been discussed many times over the last few decades, we understand, and the state understands, and actually the army understands, that recruiting Arab citizens to the military is not such a good idea. Specifically, as we have two problems. One, the fact that Arab citizens disagree with one of the main missions of Israel's military, which is maintaining occupation. And how can Arab citizens go and be part of an occupational force of their own people? This is unethical, immoral to put Arab citizens into this kind of situation. Let alone that we have more than 35,000 cross-border marriages between Palestinian citizens of Israel and Palestinians from the West Bank or Gaza. So it's the immorality is not just being the same people, but even the same families. Almost 25% of Arab citizens have first kin on the Palestinian side. So, my children are one of those cases. I'm not going to send my children to fight their first cousins.
Right, of course not. No.
So that's one issue. As long as occupation is out there, this topic should not be put on the table. The second problem goes back to the vertical debate, identity debate. Israel needs to define itself not only as the state of the Jewish people, but also the state of its citizens, to ask for Arab citizens to defend it. I want to defend my state. I don't want to defend the Jewish state. I want to defend my state. So Israel has to say to me, constitutionally and legally, I'm your state. It has to abolish the nation state law or amend it to say it's the state of the Jewish people and its citizens. And the minute the state hugs me as a legitimate citizen, then I would feel the duty to go and serve. But if it is the state of the Jewish people, so the Jewish people in the diaspora have the duty to defend it. It's their state, it's not mine. That debate puts this issue of service on hold. That's why I think that the issue of military service is one of those issues that need to be put on the shelf. Maybe we can talk about civic alternative service, where people work in hospitals, in community centers, and things like that, where you improve the civic nature of the state of Israel. The other part of the question was
would a better shared society within Israel improve the position of Israel in the wider Arab world?
Absolutely. I think that the Arab world needs to understand that Jews came to the Middle East to live in peace with the Arabs. And Israel has the chance and the opportunity to prove this in home base. And if it fails to prove this, this shows bad intentions. Israel has a vested interest to export a story of success in Jewish-Arab relations in Israel. That's the story where an Arab citizen can come and say, yes, we can live peacefully and equally with the Jews. They're not here as eternal enemies. We can become partners at work, but we can also live in the same apartment building, and an Arab can become a minister in the government, and they can become a professor at university, and not decoration here and there, but real story of partnership and coexistence. I think that this will serve Israel's national interest of integrating Israel in the Middle East, but that has to go through integrating Arab citizens inside Israel. I think this is Israel's best export to the Arab world.
Exactly. We have two questions left. Someone who asked about, we all know that religion can divide people very much. It's really easy. Are there also religious people who try to connect despite the differences? Do you have experience with that?
I mean, the interesting part, Luke, is that the Arab party that is part of the coalition is a religious party. It's an Islamic movement. And that by itself is already saying that certain segments of the religious community, in the Arab community, in the Muslim community, are definitely part of this process. But also look at the Jewish side. The prime minister is a religious prime minister. He's the one that accepted this Arab political religious party. So it depends where you put yourself religiously. If you're in political religion, then I think that you probably are more in the nationalistic aspect. And this more puts you out of the parameter of shared society. If you consider religion more of a personal relationship with God and more of your ethical and moral guiding factor, then I think it can actually become a promoter of shared society and not something that slows down the concept of shared society. I mean, it depends how you understand your religion. If you understand it as a moral aspect that teaches you to love people and teaches you to see people as the image of God, then you clearly need to become more pluralistic and tolerant. If you come with the sense that this land is for us because God inherited it to us and us only, then clearly you become exclusive in your relationship to the land, and you see everyone else as either serving you or being illegitimate. And that depends, doesn't matter which religion you come from. But if you look at it from that perspective, then the religious aspect becomes prohibitive of social interaction.
Fair enough. One final question. Is there a role for us in the Netherlands to play in improving Jewish-Arab relations? What can we do?
I mean, first of all, you can speak to a couple of friends that are in the group. I see that Paul Wessels is here, and there was also Givat. We have few people that from Holland that took on themselves to form Friends of Givat Haviva in Holland. Givat Haviva actually is, I would say, leading most of the efforts for shared society in Israel, while we do programs on the ground. So we have more of a nature of grassroots orientation. But now with this government, we have a lot of work also with the government so that there's a top-down kind of impact. We have constant dialogue with many ministries and cooperation, how to increase the percentage of Arab citizens in civil service. The best way is to educate yourself and to become engaged in programs. And as I said, the Friends Association of Givat Haviva is there, and some of the friends are here already in the group. Join us, become part, try to find ways for cooperation, collaboration. And sometimes it doesn't have to be huge, big projects. Sometimes it's just to help one Arab woman to get a job, or one student to go to study high-tech, or two classrooms, one Jewish, one Arab classrooms, to meet each other for the first time ever, to overcome that segregation, or to help two neighboring communities to build together a bicycle path where Jews and Arabs can use together. We don't have to solve every problem to do something good. We can work on even small problems. And believe me, whoever works on that and does that can sleep much better.
That's a lovely way to end it. Baby steps are steps too, as I usually say. I want to thank you. It's been an amazing lecture. We'll just keep in touch. And I want to thank everyone who's attended. And see you all next week.
Thank you, and thanks to Rebecca for arranging this. And it's always a great pleasure. This is the second year we do it. I look for next year as well.
Lovely. So do we.
Wonderful. Thank you.
All right. See you.
Shalom.
All right.